Welcome to Nobilis Erotica, the best science fiction and fantasy erotica anthology podcast in the known universe. This month, queer ghost hunting. This is episode 471. I am your host, Nobilis Reed. This episode of Nobilis Erotica is sponsored by the generous patronage of Nobilis Erotica listeners like you. To help out paying the authors and voices that create these stories, visit patreon.com/Nobilis. This month's patron-funded story is Ghost of Leather Past by Kat Griffiths. Kat is a Canadian freelance writer and co-host of the Verity podcast, who has been writing kinky, sex-positive short stories and fan fiction for over 10 years. You can find her podcast at veritypodcast.wordpress.com. Check it out if you, like me, are a Doctor Who fan. Our narrator is Jem from the Love at First Sighting podcast. I discovered this absolute gem of a podcast, pardon the pun, a few months ago, and I have to tell you, I am really impressed. Love at First Sighting brings you sex-positive, kink-friendly, thirsty conversations about the monsters and cryptids that traverse our backyards and our imaginations. Along with Jem, you'll meet Coco and Joyce as they discuss creatures, their stories, their origins, and most importantly, if they want to smash. Listeners, if you like my podcast, you're going to like theirs too. Go give it a listen. Here we go.
Ghost of Leather Past by Kat Griffiths. It was going to happen tonight. It had to. Sydney had gone to Azure, the local ritzy queer hotspot, every Thursday for months, and had seen the ghost almost every time. Yet he always disappeared into the darkness before Sydney could say a word to him. "Have you seen your ghost tonight, Sid?" No. Sydney set their empty highball glass back on the laminate tabletop, pulled out a seat for their roommate, and gave another cursory sweep of the pulsing dance floor just to be sure. "Why, did you see him?" "Sorry, I've been ghosted here, but I've never seen a ghost." Miss Alexandria, never Alex Harris, had no reason to ever be ghosted. She was intelligent, gorgeous, and funny. If Sydney was into high-maintenance femmes, they might have even slept together. There had been opportunities. However, Alexandria preferred women like herself, and Sydney, well, it was loudly advertised by their whole wardrobe for tonight. They were into the leather scene, and gender didn't matter. "What's he look like again, your ghost?" Alexandria asked. "Tall, dark hair, broad shoulders, the only entity in this place wearing leather," Sydney said, clinking shot glasses with Alexandria and then tipping it back, appreciating the burn of the whiskey as it fell down their throat. "Other than you," Alexandria did that thing where she gave Sydney a full head-to-toe look and then a half-smile. "Reasonable effort," it seemed to say, with your leather chaps over button-up Levi's, classic rock t-shirt under a leather vest, and engineer boots. Alexandria had bought the boots for Sid after announcing that her roommate's genderqueer leather look was missing them. In exchange, Sid had to go dancing. Sid agreed, even with the style belonging in a leather bar 40 years ago, not a dance club. "Yes," Sid said, rolling their eyes. "He's see-through, too, like he's a bit translucent." "Uh-huh." Sydney turned in the direction Alexandria was looking. Their ghost talk was losing the battle to a woman wearing a black harness who occasionally glanced in Alexandria's direction. She looked to be very much their roommate's type. "Hey, Sid, I feel horrible asking this, but do you mind if I—" Sydney gave a short laugh and shook their head. "Go be you. I'll ghost hunt on my own." "Love you. Be careful," she warned after pressing a quick kiss to their cheek. Sydney nodded as Alexandria walked with her drink over to the woman and her friends. No sooner was Alexandria caught up in flirting with a woman who could play her red-haired twin in a movie than Sydney caught a glimpse of an outline in a leather jacket moving along the back wall of the club. At first, Sid thought it was just a guy heading to the bathrooms, but he paused near a hall with a sign that read, "Employees Only," and he flickered. He seemed to only partially exist. Parts of his limbs faded in and out like a transporter was trying to beam him back and couldn't quite reach him. Sydney had never seen him so clearly before. It had always been little glimpses of movement amongst patches of transparency. No one else seemed to notice him, even in his somewhat over-the-top leather jacket and chaps. But Sid couldn't look away as the ghost slowly scanned the room looking for something, or someone. The song changed, as did the energy in the room. The dancers rearranged themselves closer to the DJ with cheers, and Sid was allowed to stand and get a better look without being jostled. They watched the ghost look in their direction and then look away, and then back again. When his eyes met Sid's, they felt a not completely uncomfortable sensation, like ice water dripping down their spine. Maybe this was all a trick of the light. Wait, was he telling them to follow him? They wove through the first group of dancers past an oblivious Alexandria, then the second group without him moving. When Sydney finally pushed past the last few people dancing, then he started down the employees-only hall, occasionally glancing back. Sydney felt so conflicted. Should they follow him down a dark hallway? They hesitated and drummed their fingers anxiously. Really, it was an easy choice. They had to do it. They turned the corner and walked quickly, not thinking about how insane this was, just focused on the end of the service corridor. It was only half lit for the 1 or 2 staff working alongside security tonight. The rest was full of shadows that followed Sydney or became something else if they spent too long staring at them. Just keep moving. The long hall emptied out into another shorter one, and then 3 large supply rooms. Sydney picked the furthest to the right and found it empty. The middle seemed too obvious, too close. They went to the far left and cautiously glanced around the corner. Sydney's ghost was there, as real as the open metal shelving unit he was leaning on, waiting. He stared at them with his arms folded over his distressed rock t-shirt from a similar genre to theirs. Panic briefly gripped Sydney as they backed out of the supply room. Taking a breath, heart thumping, they tried to gather themselves back together. Sydney went back in before they could come up with an excuse to walk away. "So," Sydney eventually said, "you're..." They cleared their dry throat. "You're not a ghost." The man opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He blinked and tried again without success, and then shook his head. When he looked down at himself, his body suddenly flickered like a television on static. "Are you okay?" He ignored Sydney, his attention drawn to a copper bracelet on his wrist that he gently stroked until numbers appeared above it. The room pulsed, and his flickering stopped. He suddenly became high definition, completely solid again. With his sudden touchable appearance, his aggressive look seemed to fade, and he huffed out a breath. "These temporal shifters never behave on weekends," he said, as though that made sense. "It's Thursday," Sydney whispered, strangely overwhelmed by everything. Stranger still, because moments ago they thought they were chasing a ghost. "What are you?" "You followed me, and you don't know what I am?" There was a cocky smirk on his lips directed at Sydney. He walked towards them until he was standing almost toe-to-toe. "I think you know, and given how you're dressed..." He tapped Sydney's engineer boots with his own and adjusted the folded collar of their vest. "I'd guess we have the same taste." The normally confident Sydney found their words slipping away and mentally refocused. "I saw you go transparent," they said. "You need to tell me what you are right now or I'm leaving." His smile faded, replaced by a serious expression that chilled Sydney. "I'll show you then." He stroked the bracelet that didn't blend with the leather ensemble and vanished, reappearing across the room. "See?" Crossing the room, the leather man walked them back to the wall, and although Sydney could have slipped away at any point, they didn't. They wanted to be exactly where they were, pressed against the wall by their ghost that wasn't a ghost. His hand reached down and cupped the bulge in Sydney's jeans, the one they had put there before going out tonight. He squeezed and studied their reaction, settling on his arm against the wall by Sid's shoulder, leaning in to press his lips against theirs. Sydney pressed back, pushed against him, and finally, a smile once again broke on his lips. He was real. He was a leather man seemingly plucked straight out of their daydreams, made flesh and blood, and his hand was slowly working open the front of Sydney's jeans, dipping inside to wrap around their cock. There was a brief moment of surprise on his features when his fingers touched the silicone, not flesh, bulge, but that quickly disappeared and was replaced with an easy smile. "Well, I don't think they have this kind of cock when I'm from," he teased. "When?" Sydney asked. They were getting over their initial shock, and their fingers were making quick work of the fasteners on the leather man's jeans. "I'm from 1983, he answered plainly. "This bracelet lets me skip forward and back in time." "So you came to 2025 from 1983? Why?" Sydney would wonder later, wanting to just skip to the chase, drop to their knees, wrap their lips around the hard cock they could feel under his thin briefs. Fucking a hot, hard leather man just like the ones in the books they read, had always been a fantasy. Now the smell of his jacket, the feel of the leather under their fingers, and the contrast of the denim was heady and clogged their senses. He didn't answer, just gave an experimental tug on the silicone cock in his hand, watching as Sydney closed their eyes and hummed in pleasure at the sensations on their clit, tipping up their hips so he would do it again. "Why me?" Sydney gasped as his hands pulled them off balance with rough and bruising fingertips. "Why now?" That was probably the best question. Before the leather man could answer, Sydney gave in to their want, pushed his hands aside, and dropped down to their knees. They paused as he smoothed latex over the skin, then wrapped their lips around the covered cock and felt their own arousal double. The leather man groaned, tangling his fingers in their asymmetric hair, and pulled Sydney deeper. He took control of the pace, easing off when Sydney gagged and then tugging them forward in short, sharp strokes. "This place is a leather bar in my day," he said with his head tipped back. "I guess I just like getting sucked off in familiar places." Sydney snorted, and the leather man gave his own laugh above them, then tugged their hair. "Come on, get up." His smirk never went away, and Sydney matched it as they turned them to face the wall, pulling down their denim and leather. He stepped between their legs, holding them in place with his boot on the jeans still wrapped around Sydney's ankles. They tried to touch as much as they could, while the leather man tossed his jacket aside with a thump, then pulled Sydney's vest off and tossed it aside too. He smoothed his fingers under their t-shirt and dragged his nails down their stomach until they arched their back into him. It all happened quickly, but never seemed to be quick enough. Something slick on their ass, Sydney didn't care what it was, and then he was pushing in. Sid felt so full, and both of them moaned. Everything came together. His body was heavy against theirs, pinning them and holding them, as the heavy scent of the cleaning supplies around them mingled with sweat and leather. The scent was what Sydney's fantasies always lacked, and they breathed in deep, closing their eyes to try to feel every sensation and throb. They didn't want it to end. Even if they never came, they didn't want this to end. "If you're waiting for me, don't." His breathy gasps in Sydney's ear accompanied his hips snapping forward, drawing them out of their head and back to reality. A knee slipped underneath them so he could get even closer and deeper. Sydney rubbed against it and felt him stutter. He growled when he spoke, each word punctuated by a thrust. "Come for me." Sydney did with a loud groan, and they collapsed heavily against the wall under the leather man's weight, and they knew, happily, they'd have bruises from it. He kept himself up with an arm, his forehead resting on the back of Sydney's neck, his nose pressed into the shorter hair as the dulled sound of the music in the main room and their breathing was the only thing filling the room. "If I call you a fine tight ass, you'd know I mean it as a compliment, right?" he said. Sydney laughed and reached up to wipe sweat from their forehead, turning halfway to stare at the man as he straightened. "Yes, thank you. Now, can you get off my jeans so I can cover my tight ass, please?" The leather man laughed and stepped back, tossing the tied-off condom to the side and pulling up his jeans, fiddling with the chaps to adjust them and fasten them. The pair got dressed in silence, grabbing clothes for each other and exchanging little flirty touches here and there with a familiarity that seemed to surpass the short 20 minutes they spent together. "You didn't answer my question," Sydney said, as they adjusted the packer back into the jeans. "Why me?" The leather man pulled on his heavy jacket. "I've visited different time periods, but you seem to be in the wrong one. I kept coming back trying to get your attention to see if you were like me, but I only have about an hour battery for each time shift if I use as little power as possible. Hence the ghostness. So," he trailed off and then shrugged. "All this time, I don't even know your name." "Sydney." "Travis." The bracelet started to glow as though on cue, and Travis cursed under his breath. "I have to go. Sorry to, fucking run." Sydney didn't want him to go, but what did you say in this situation? "Hey, can you take people back with you to 1983? They blurted out. Travis raised his eyebrows, and his smirk grew broader. "Not this time. I mean, I'm low on juice, but if I came back another night and met you right away..." He thought for a moment. "Yeah, nothing saying I can't." The idea of going back in time with him to wherever he was from, spending time with him and maybe fucking in a leather bar was amazing. Sydney downplayed it. "Cool. Same time?" "Yeah, make sure you wear your boots." Sydney didn't ask why, and Travis didn't elaborate. He just winked, touched the bracelet, and disappeared in a pulse of energy. "Hey, you shouldn't be back here." The security guard's voice came out of nowhere, breaking the spell of the moment. Sydney turned and plastered on a look of confusion as they hurried past the frowning woman. Sorry, I got lost. On the dance floor, they gave Alexandria a kiss on the cheek as they passed, making the redhead glare in their direction. I found my ghost, Sydney declared happily. That's great, Sid. I'm gonna go home. They didn't wait for a response. They had history research to do.
And that's our story. If your desire for fantastic erotic audio fiction isn't sated, you can get more every month over on the Patreon campaign at patreon.com/nobilis. You can join our newest patron, Rel, in enjoying monthly bonus fiction, which will very shortly be getting the final episode of the Transformation Fetish serial called My Wild Card. Supporters are already getting chapters of Hallowed Covenant, a BDSM erotic science fiction novel by Eunice Hung and Franklin Vo. Now is a great time to join the Patreon. You can gather up all of the My Wild Card stuff and get in on all of Hallowed Covenant. Patrons are also granted access to the Nobilis Erotica Discord server. Come and join us. Let us know what you think. Talk about the episodes. Talk about other stuff. In addition, remember to pick up Monster Whisperer Second Class at your favorite ebook retailer or on the Riverdale Avenue Books website. Your support will help make sure this series continues. You have been listening to the Nobilis Erotica podcast. Theme music is composed and performed by Mass Relay. This podcast is released under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives license. Until next time, listen hard.